Well, there are some interesting mechanisms in place to help schools with that, and you mentioned DPIAs, so we should perhaps give a bit of an overview, Claire, if
Mm.
that's all right, as to what a good DPIA looks like. But then moving on from that, of course, as you've alluded to already, just having the DPIA in place doesn't necessarily mean that staff are adhering to best practice. We've found in a lot of the conversations we've had with schools and indeed in research that AI use is often far from transparent in terms
Mm.
of how it's being used by different stakeholders across the organization. So let's maybe tackle that one first. What is a DPIA and what does a good DPIA look like?
So a DPIA, is a data risk assessment. Very simple. And schools are really used to writing risk assessments. They do it all the time. Every time they want to take their children off the premises, or they want to do a PE lesson, or they're climbing up and down the gym equipment, they do risk assessments, health and safety risk assessments, and so on. So I always try to demystify it and say, it's primarily a risk assessment, just with a data focus. It's really important to focus that the subject of that risk assessment on the data subjects, the risk to those individuals, what is the impact on the data subject, and how are you going to mitigate against that? Not how is the organisation going to mitigate against them getting a reprimand or a fine from the regulator. So I think a really good risk assessment does lots of things. I think, for a lot of education settings, I think one of the things that they really could improve on is having really good project plans. So for me, a really good risk assessment for data is going to look at all of the data protection principles. Is it fair, lawful and transparent? Are you minimizing the data? How are you going to store it for the minimum amount of time possible? How are you, yes, security, all of those principles, and then looking at each of the risks against each of the principles so that you really flush it out. So rather than looking at a blank table, you're already going, well, these are all the risks, and how might they surface. And then I think for AI, I think you could really adapt that DPIA template to then further embed some AI risks. So, if you're looking at lawfulness, fairness and transparency, perhaps then you could, in that kind of category, you could look at intellectual property risk, and call your DPIA a DPIA and an AI risk assessment, and make it bigger and have a look at all of those risks as well. So again, you can build out and really expand that. The next thing I think that is really often overlooked as part of the DPIA process, and I think the DPIA, an annex or an appendix, is a really good place to kind of show the audit trail of that, is around the vendor due diligence. So really having a detailed conversation, really looking at the vendors' terms in detail, making sure that you read them, understand, any ambiguous terms or terms that are really in a vendor's favour, and then making sure that you've got some evidence that you've gone and done some due diligence on that vendor as well, in terms of how do they store data, what's their security protocols, they're looking at their down chain as well in terms of their suppliers, really examining that. And then again, the security piece, the data protection security piece, again, you can expand that to do due diligence on maybe an AI model. So really looking at how the app is built, how maybe system prompts are worded, what safeguards are in the system, what protection from jailbreaking is in the system. In England or Wales, then the DFE standards for AI and for students, ask if it's student facing AI, asking those particular questions around monitoring and filtering and how that's built into the system. So again, the DPIA can be a vehicle for a lot of evidence of what does success look like, what are absolutely all of the risks, not just from a data point of view, but as you say, you can build it out. There's no rule that says DPIAs need to just do one thing and you need to go and do AI risk assessment somewhere else. It can all be as part of one big project plan. And then really that due diligence, both in terms of the vendor and what they're doing, and in terms of, if it's an AI, how their AI model, tool, app, interface, etc., is all built as well. So there's loads you can do the DPIA. I love them. I could do them all day.